There are two things that money is for. It's a medium of exchange, and it's a storehold of wealth.
Yes.
So money, so you could say something's a medium of exchange, and then you could say, is it a storehold of wealth? Okay. So and money is that vehicle that is those things and can be used to pay off your debt. So when you have a debt and you provide it, it pays off your debt. So that's that process.
Right.
And so you see in the history and around the world, and you go to places. I was in an island in the Pacific in which they had as money these big stones. And literally, they were taking a boat, this big carved stone, and they were taking it from one of the islands to the other, and it sank. The piece of this big stone, piece of money that they had, and it went to the bottom, and they still perceived it as having value, so that it was, even though it was in the bottom and it's this big hunk of rock, the fact that somebody owned it, they would say, oh, I'll own it for this and that. I've seen beads in different places, shells converted to this and mediums of exchange. And when we look at what we've got, you're exactly right. It is the notion that if I give it to you, I can then take it and I can buy something with it. And so it's a matter of perception. Okay. And then we go through then the history of money and the vulnerabilities of money. And what we have is through history, there's been two types of money. Those that are claims on something of value, like the connection to gold or something.
That's right.
That would be, or they just are money without any connection. And then we have a system now, which is a fiat monetary system. So that's what money is. Then it will last as long as it's kept of value, and it works that way. So let's say central banks, when they get in the position of like they owe a lot of money, like we have in the case, it's increasingly the case, and they also are a bind, and they have the printing press to print the money and get out of that, and you have a lot of people might be in that position, then you can print it, and then it could be devalued in there. And so history has shown, forget about today, history has shown that no currency every currency has either ended as being a currency, or devalued as a currency over periods of time, long periods of time. So it evolves and it changes, but everybody needs that medium of exchange, and everybody needs that storehold of wealth. So it keeps changing what is money over a period of time.
The real question for me was, what were the marginal benefits of diversification like? What is that going to look like? Okay. And what I then decided to do was to think about risk and the number of sample size and the correlation of the bets, broke it down to each of its components, right? So to use an example, let's assume you have, to make it simple, a return, something that has a 10% risk. We'll call risk standard deviation. And let's make it simple, and let's say it had a 10% return. And let's say I add in another asset, another return stream. I add in a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, up to whatever number. How would that reduce my risk if it on average has a 60% correlation? Or if it has on average has a 40% correlation, or a 0% correlation? How would that change? Wanted to know that, right? So that's what this chart shows, right? And so, so imagine you have a 10% average return. You don't know which bet is going to be better. Has a 10% average return and a 10% risk. And you add in a second and a third and so on. You're not going to lose the 10% because you're still going to have that 10% return, but you're going to then have a reduction, and that's the reduction in risk. And if it has a 60% correlation and you have 3 or 4, you will get a reduction that maybe it's about 15%, and you could add in 1,000 if they're 60% correlated, and you're not going to reduce your risk much. Okay, that's important. Now, if I look at that, how that changes according to the levels of the correlation, I start to think, well, what would happen if I added in something that had a 10% correlation, by way of example? Okay, now that's what that line shows, okay? And it shows how much, okay, at about 7 or 8 or so, I cut my risk in half. That means I've doubled my return relative to my risk, right? Ooh, that's good. So as I go down this, I then start to understand what the power of diversification is in terms of the things that I'm going to look for. So what that taught me is the magic is you only need to do this simple thing. The simple thing is to find 15 or 20 good, uncorrelated return streams. Things that are probably going to make money, but you don't know, but they have a good probability of making money, and that are uncorrelated, that have low correlation. That told me that's what I have to go after, right? That's the key. A lot of people think that the most important thing you could do is find the best investments. Okay? That's important, okay, but there is no great one best investment that can compete with something like this. So look at this line. When this comes down, you can improve your return to risk ratio by a factor of 5, right? 5 times the expected return for that unit of risk. You can't pick any investments that are probably, nobody's humanly capable in an efficient market probably to pick investments that are 5 times as good individually, but so that path. So it tells me about the power of diversification and balancing risk. So this is the return to risk ratio that happens for each one of those. You know, like if I can get 0 correlation and I have 15 to 20, I'll have an information ratio, a return to risk ratio of 1.25. That means my probability of losing money in a year is only 11%, okay, as distinct from 40% with any one of us. So that's the power of portfolio construction and the power of diversification, okay? So it tells me what I have to go after.